Benjamin can have love for the truckie. Beautiful minds, but we love getting ugly. Risk takers with a clover, man, we love getting lucky. You run, we chase fire, I love when it ducks me. Tones go off, house watch, read the address out. 1075, get up off the magic couch. 500 gallons prepared for the baddest drought. Who else you want on the way when disaster's out? Can't even get a little bit rattled when you enter with exit apparel. Mayday, member down, they'll drag you. You won't get this from every Tom, Dick, and Harold, but here's a view from the top floor with Mickey Farrell.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of A View from the Top Floor. Today, I have my good friend Anthony Arwett from Mobile Fire Engine 3, the House of Pain. Anthony, if you know Anthony, he's a diehard engine guy. Through and through, he's the engine company man. He's an FDIC instructor. He's all over the country teaching about standpipes, stretches, packs. And we were away recently on a trip, having dinner, having a couple of drinks, and we were just chatting about engine company culture and the pride of the engine company. So I truly am a truckie through and through by heart, but I do know that the job is the engine company. Everybody wants the knob, right? The job is the knob. There's so much pride in the engine company, and I think that we're kind of losing that. So we're going to talk about the pride of the engine company and maybe dive into a few tactics here and there, but most of all, I want to talk about that loss of understanding how important company pride is. Anthony, thanks for joining us today.
No, I appreciate your time having me on your show.
Yeah, so Engine 3, tell us a little bit about Engine 3, and I know that you instill a tremendous amount of engine company pride in your company.
Yeah, so we're one of the oldest companies in the city, predate the fire department going paid. We were one of the volunteer departments that the city did transition over when they became a paid fire department. Cover the downtown area and the surrounding areas that border that downtown corridor. Also, the shipyard, all the shipyard support. So a wide variety of things, which make it really easy to have a good culture, especially for training. Because young guys want to go there because you're busy and you do a lot, but also it's not the same thing every day. You come in, you can look at something and go, we haven't touched on that in a while. What if we have a fire in the tunnel? What if we have a fire on a bridge? What if we have a fire in a shipyard? Not just houses, even high rises. I mean, we're able to just change it up a lot to keep it. It's always something new. It's not repetitive. So it's easy to keep that culture training wise going. And then just it's busy. So young guys want to be there. And then there's just a lot of senior guys there as far as officers. I'm between two. There's three captains. We have three shifts, and the other two both have 30 plus years on the job. They're both legacy guys. They're brothers. Their dad was a captain in that company. So they try to keep all the traditions going he had. And then I came up with those as the senior guys that taught me. So I'm trying to honor the traditions they had. And we just keep all those traditions, all that pride of what that company's always been alive, and just keep it going and passing it on to the next generations that are coming up, wanting to be in a busy station in a company that does a lot of stuff. So it makes it pretty easy actually for us to do that because we have those senior guys and it's such an old company with a lot of traditions.
For those of you that don't know Mobile, Alabama, and I wasn't familiar with Mobile until recently when I met Anthony. I guess I should re-met Anthony because we've known each other quite some time, but we didn't put the pieces together until a few years ago. That said, though, Mobile is, I would call it like a mini Detroit in the South. Like there's a ton of work going on down there, and the culture is incredible. I had the opportunity to stop in your firehouse the one time, and the chief of the department showed us around, and I was taken back by the legacy or tradition and pride and culture that you truly have there, and that's something that even some of the largest cities in the nation don't have. And here you are. I guess what are you, the largest or the second largest in Alabama?
We're like the second largest. We're the second largest city, probably the second largest fire department. I think the only department bigger than us is Birmingham.
Birmingham, okay. Yeah, and I would like to think that you're probably doing the most work in the state, for what I can see at least. I mean, every time I talk to you, you're going to a fire. But everything you just said about as far as like the senior guys and the culture and tradition that was passed on, when we were talking that one night at dinner, I think that some of the basics, right? I always talk about the devil's in the details of everything we do, but that's as simple as packing hose the right way. I see the nozzle on the ground more often than not today. I was always taught when the fire's out, whatever else, and we're packing hose, you uncouple that nozzle. It either goes around your waist belt, in your pocket, but you bring it right back to the back step and place it there. So when we get to the point of attaching the nozzle, it's always right there. But there's a sign of respect to that nozzle. I was taught to keep that nozzle like the holy grail, like it never touches the ground at any cost. Even on the fire floor, right? When we're passing it off to the next company, never put that nozzle down. Hand that nozzle off to the next company moving up on the line.
Yeah, so we're the same way. When we're packing hose, it's disconnected and it's sitting on the back step, waiting for all the hose to be reloaded and put back in. We try to do our best that it's the same thing. The nozzle gets handed off. Um, Try not to give it to anybody else, but it is given to another company if you're being relieved. But with us, when we get to where we're getting ready to overhaul, we get the fire knocked down. We let the investigator go in and do his thing, and nobody else is really in there with him. We got to put it down. So what we try to do is it's not on the ground. It's not just in a pile of crap on the ground. It's propped up against the wall, up against the cabinets, something like that, where it's in a position you can walk in and just grab it, but it's not laying in the dirt on the ground.
Now let's take it back to the hose bed. We're packing the hose, right? Where I come from, you'll have sometimes 30 guys packing the line, but it's one of those things that where like it's company integrity. Everybody wants to be a piece of it. Everybody wants to be part of that pride. The engine company, the tremendous pride is when you are packing that hose. If you have that nozzle, you belong in that hose bed. That's your platform. That's your stage. That's where you ultimately look down, not looking down upon the other brothers, but you're looking down and everyone's looking up at you saying, wow, that kid did a really nice job. He had the nozzle. He put 2 or 3 rooms of fire out. That's your opportunity to shine. That's company pride. That's engine company pride. I'm starting to see now the senior guys just jumping up and getting the job done because maybe the kid who had the nozzle is now taking selfies in the street with his buddies saying, oh, look at the fire we went to. I mean, I'm all for taking the photo, but let's get that company back in service. Let's get that hose packed properly and with pride. And while that's happening, be the guy on top of the rig looking down. Again, that's your platform and your stage.
Yeah, so for us, one thing we run into is that is a little bit different is we'll have chiefs that want to start getting lines that aren't being used put back on the rigs so the rigs are ready to go back in service. You might still be inside overhauling. So what we do is the driver, if that's your rig, he's in charge and they know make sure it's right. But then when we get to the final, whatever was, lines were inside still doing overhaul, things like that, when that goes back in the truck, we'll make sure if we were first due, our guys are up in that hose bed. I quoted you the other day because the guy knows you, but we came out, he had the nozzle. I said, go get in your pedestal. Go get on your pedestal, put the hose back.
I mean, that's the best part. It's not hanging down, right? Dirty face, like soaking wet, but you have a smile ear to ear. Looking down at the fire scene, at the fire ground in general, thinking like, you know what? I'm a fireman. I did this. I put out 2 or 3 rooms. And that's the ultimate. That's what makes the knob the job is that moment. Overhaul in the truck, it can be tasking, but a lot of times it's fun. You're pulling ceilings, you're opening up the walls, you're getting dirty. For the engine company, it's not always so fun, especially when it's 14 below zero and you're sitting there hitting hot spots and the officer's saying, all right, one more douche, we're going to hit this room. And you're thinking, come on, man, this fire's out. You're soaking wet. You want to go home. All those things. I mean, again, overhaul is not really such a fun thing in the engine, but again, when you get to the street, that's where the engine company shines as far as the overhaul stage. But the truck, we stamp our work or our company pride, our character on the way we overhaul, right? We go in, we tear everything down. We have the room framed out like we're going to install a new kitchen or a new bath the next day. That's company pride as far as truck company overhauling. The engine, that company pride is the way you pack that hose. When you get back to the firehouse and you take a look at that hose bed, and if it's packed perfectly, that's company pride. That's what it's about. And that's something I'm seeing even some of the greatest companies that I've always looked up to and respected. I'm still seeing sloppy hose beds. And I don't know where that disconnect is, or is it out of laziness? I mean, years ago, they were doing more runs than ever before. We're still doing a lot of runs, but let's make sure we get the hose bed packed perfectly. When I say perfectly, just neat and orderly. A sloppy hose bed to me doesn't show me that you're doing any work. It shows me that you're lazy and you lack pride. The argument a lot of times goes is like, well, it's just going to come right off tonight anyway. Well, pack it like it's going on for a parade, in my opinion. That shows company pride. That shows when you have the rig cleaned, ready to go out the door, right? A lot of guys like a dirty-looking rig. I like a clean rig. It shows that you have company pride. But these are all the little details that we're losing, especially I feel like in most of the cities are engine-based departments for the most part. So that engine culture is trickling down, and we're losing some of the special things that made the engine the job.
Yeah, and I'll hit on a couple things you just said that aren't necessarily engine culture sometimes too, but like you say with Overhaul, like the truck's putting its stamp on it. If we go to a single story house or a single family house, we're only getting one truck. The engines are doing a lot of overhaul with them, pulling ceilings, all that. We're putting our pride on it. And I had this talk with the truck boss last night because I knew we were going to talk about this. We talked about it when we were out of town of like, well, whose responsibility is the overhaul? And I'm looking at it as it's mine. He's looking at it as it's his. And we were both going, okay, whose name's on it if you go back? If you go back on a rekindle, who's taking the blame, the engine or the truck? For us, it's going to fall on the engine captain. That's just the way for our department is. So I'm not trying to leave if I don't know for sure. So for us, a lot of times too, the blame for us goes back to the engine because when we get to those final stages, the chiefs will leave it with us. They'll leave. Fire alarm, you show this chief back in service. Scene's been turned over to engine 3. Well, now the one that's canceling that command saying this fire is out is me. It's my name. It's my voice on the radio. I got to make sure it's out. We don't go back. If we go back, it's going to fall on the engine. Just the way we do things. So we need to take pride in it. And just like you said, we talked about it when we were in Colorado because we had just had a fire where we had a young guy asking questions. We're taking everything out of this kitchen and this kitchen fire to where they could remodel it tonight because that's how I know we're not going back. All the doors are framed out. The windows are framed out. Cabinets are gone. We got shovels in there and we're taking everything out all the way down to the bare floor because then I know we're not going back. But also, like what you were talking about with the wanting a clean rig and a neat hose bed. One thing we do, and a lot of people's, it's excessive. Okay, well, I learned it from senior guys I really look up to, and they're honoring the traditions passed down from their dad. Of we'll wash the rig in the morning when we come into work and we check it off. But every time that rig rolls out the door, when we come back, it gets rinsed off. It sounds excessive, but every single time we get that, it doesn't have to be washed every time. We'll just rinse it with the hose. We'll get that road grime off of it. Every time that truck gets seen or it rolls out the door, it's spotless. It's clean. It doesn't take us long to do that, but what the pride it shows, and it's still just honoring those guys that came before us. That tradition came from, they used to wash the rig every time it left, chamois it dry. It was spotless and clean every time it rolled. That's what the public saw was this truck was always spotless. So we could just honor those traditions. And what does it do? It teaches pride. Guys are learning there is pride in this truck being clean. There is pride in a hose bed looking good. You know, I mean, that little things go a long way, especially with new guys coming in and they're learning the culture of the fire department that, okay, I can take a few minutes and just rinse the rig off. It doesn't take very long. There's no road grime built up on it. You know, it's just something that stands, you know, in company pride. And for us, it goes back to those guys and it came to their performance. We're trying to match their performance they became known for and they set the standards for us. They weren't doing the medical runs. So I get that. They were only doing the fires, but we can still honor it. They washed the rig every time. Okay. But every time they went to, it didn't matter if it was burning, it was just an alarm. They put hose on the ground. They stretched, they got supply lines on the ground. They might not charge them, but what that did is they learned their buildings. They knew where every hydrant was, every FDC. And like I said, the two captains around me are brothers. I've heard their dad 20 years since he retired talk about a building that his son went to. We were talking about a shift change, talking about, okay, well, the stairwells are here, the FDC's here. And I've talked about that specific story before. That's 20 years after retiring, and he still knew the buildings that well, the hydrant system that well, just because they took the pride to do it right every single time. And that translates to their performance.
Yeah, and I think that what you touched on was how every run you're rinsing the rig off, and that actually started a little history lesson way back when the rigs would go out and they'd have to clean the horse manure off when they got back. So every run they were hosing down the actual wheels because the horse was pulling the steamer, running over the horse manure, and then when they get back, they don't want to back it into quarters, so they would hose it down every single run. It's kind of cool that that's still a tradition, and that's where it actually started from, and that's translated to company pride today. But everything in the fire service comes from somewhere, and we have to do our due diligence to pass on whatever that tradition is because it started from somewhere. To touch back on what you were saying about who's responsible ultimately to pull the plug in a fire, right? The engine of the truck, and I think it goes hand in hand, but I had a fire that jumps out to me when you're talking about that. It was a multiple alarm fire. We went there later on the alarms. We were an engine company, and I had to make the final call from this multiple alarm fire to say, shut down the line. We're going to drain it. We're up. But this was after like hours and hours and hours of a fire. So it was something that it was a huge responsibility, and I took it very seriously. Where we're so quick to take up a lot of times. We really thoroughly have to make sure we give one extra wash down, one extra douche, whatever it is. We have to make sure the fire's actually out. But I remember going back and laying in bed and thinking, oh my God, I don't want to wake up to a rekindle from that fire, because ultimately you made that last call. You told the chief, this looks good. Flip it around. I had a fire just last night in the truck side of things. A lot of opening up, a lot of overhaul, and they put a lot of water on this fire afterwards. And I understood because there were so many void spaces. There were so many pipe chases that were affected by this fire that we opened it up for the engine. But now ultimately the engine says the final call, where that's the last thing we do. We give it one last douche and then the fire's under control. I don't think we can put a fire truly under control until we get that one last douche in the fire apartment, the fire room, and then the truck steps back, opens that up, and then the chief makes the final call, obviously. But it goes hand in hand, but we have to be able to open up the areas enough for the engine to access those void areas. And I think that's something, getting away from just the engine side of things, we have to open up more frequently and more often. That's why we're having fires go from a one-bedroom fire to a multiple alarm fire. Flip it around to overhaul stage. We have to open up the area. We have to pull the ceilings. We have to open every bay in the room. That's company pride, but it's allowing for you as the engine to get in there and hit that last room that makes sure the fire's out. Far, far too often we're seeing rekindles. I don't even like the word rekindle. You never did your job. So rekindle isn't really a word in my vocabulary as far as firefighting tactics per se. It's you didn't do your job the first time. And that's the bottom line. And it happens to some of the best companies over the decades, I'm sure, but let's try not to make that happen. So let's talk about a little bit more of the tactics side of things, maybe. So from the truck company, when you're going to floor above the fire as a secondary truck company, it's paramount that you make confirmation with that first due engine officer or that first due nozzleman, if the officer officer is in the apartment looking for the fire. And you have to look them right in the eye and say, brother, ladder one, we're going above. That's part of culture that ties in with tactics that I think we're kind of losing sight of. It still happens, but I don't think we have to stress how important that is, because ultimately, when you're going above, by making that contact with that first due engine, they know at that point that with the brothers above operating, the only place they're going is to the burn center. Now, is that something that's a culture in your department as well?
Yeah, and being in a double house, it's easy for us because we're around each other so much. We train together, we know each other so well, and we're showing up around the same time that he's going. We get the door force. They're trying to get in front of us and get their search ahead of our line. But it's a real moment for that officer who I'm very close with, who was a mentor when I first came on the fire department. Say, hey, bro, I'm going up, or I'm going in front of you, and I know they're not. It's not some searching off a line. They're searching without a line. They're in a compromised position, and when I say, "Yeah, I got you," go ahead, I got you. He knows I'm not leaving. If things go south, get to us and we'll go out together. But we're not leaving without you. Your protection is this hose. You get back to us, we've got you protected. And we had that play out at a fire. We were ended up being the RIT team, but they were searching after we went back in, and we had got some people out, and they started pulling everybody out. And later was like, you guys didn't come out when we first told you. And we were like, hey, we weren't coming out till we had the truck. Like, we knew he was searching ahead of us. We are waiting on him to get to us so we could come out together. They're in a compromised position. We can't leave them alone. Their way out is through us if things go south. So when they come by and they tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, we're going up or we're going in front of you, when you nod and say yes, you have to understand what you're saying to them. And another thing with that is that the things you say on the radio aren't always, for the chief. Simply saying, hey, we got water on the fire, you don't have it knocked down yet. That's not just for the chief to know you've made it there. You're letting the truck know we got it. Hey, we're here. We got it, and that goes a long way. I've had that conversation with you. I've had that conversation a lot of times with the truck boss in our firehouse who said, I'll push the envelope. I know your guys would never leave me. As an engine
No,
boss, especially when I'm off and my driver's acting up and he's the officer and they're treating him the same as that connection I've had of a lot of years of making fires with this officer in the truck where I'm the engine officer, he's the truck officer. Now I've got a driver who acts up and he treats it the same way. I know you've trained him. I've made fires with them when they were firemen and the firemen you have now. I know if I tell him I'm going above, he won't leave me. That goes a
no, yeah,
long way.
that's so important. You know, that's something as far as a truck firefighter, a truck officer. When you're on the floor above, we all have an internal clock, and that internal clock's got to be ticking at all times. But how often do I say that we have to be listening to the radio at all times? And there's so much stuff on the radio that steps on the important things. Important things, start water, right? A simple command, but that knows, okay, now is the OV. Maybe we can take the windows now. We can start making moves. Those X's and O's can go into position. But it all comes on the timing of the engine company. We have to get that line into place before other parts of the game are played. That's engine culture. It is. And water on the fire, like you said, when you hear that, the tempo of the fire automatically changes. It drastically changes. It slows down. So we can go from a tempo of a fire that's very fast, like very rapid. You hear the transmission water on the fire. Now we just dial it back. The stress level is lowered. We can think a little bit clearly, as well as we can push ourselves a little bit farther, especially on the floor above the fire. We should always be searching to a second point of egress, especially on the floor above. But with that, we have to be listening to the engine timing. That internal clock is very, very important. Talk about a larger building. For example, is a 6-story building. Top floor fire. If you're searching that apartment, that's a long stretch. It's going to take a long time for the engine to get into place. That's important as far as knowing area of refuge, dialing it back, using the door to hold fire back, to cut fire back, not disrupting that flow path. But no, I believe the flow path is a disruption within a tactical movement. We have to understand the tactics of the game we're playing. That all comes down to engine culture. And when I say culture, truck culture different than engine culture. I've talked about truck culture many times where it's something that's not really taught. It's passed on from generation to generation. There's truck mindset, the X's and O's, the firefighter IQ of firefighting. That's truck mindset. I think engine culture, a little different now. And tell me what you think about this. Truck culture is talking about that stretch. Yes, it's talking about packing the hose bed properly, but when you pack it properly, the hose comes off clean. So it's all part of that culture that transfers over to more the tactic side of things, right?
Yeah, and for me, I think ultimately, and I take a lot of pride in the fact that the fire you got to go to in the city where Engine 3 was first in, some things happened and you got to see it. And that is our culture, but it's an understanding of once you're on the fire ground, we have to constantly move forward. Especially with inch and 3/4 lines. It's not a staying power line, just hold the line here. It's a constantly progressing forward line. And you saw that at that fire, that is our engine culture, that things might not always go right. They constantly move forward, shake their head off like they got punched in the nose and keep moving forward. Reevaluate. We're still good. Keep going. And that's the culture we've passed down that I take pride in of being able to pass on to the next guys is what those senior guys taught us of what you can and can't do, what you can push through and can't push through, knowing that you have the tool that's going to make it better and allow that truck to get that search and get in those positions they couldn't get in unless you bought them some space back by making that push down the hallway. So I think it's two-sided. There's the side of the pride of just the hose bed looks good, the truck's clean all the time. We take a lot in that. But when we go on the fire ground, it's a fight and we don't want to lose. But we have to progressively move forward as the engine. We can't just let space be eaten up because then the truck can't get the search. Even if the house is a loss and there's only one room that's not fully involved, we have to buy time for a search of at least that room. Or maybe we get some space, bought back and we can search the rest of the room for sure, the house, but at least get that room done. And we've had that at fires where Chief said, okay, we got the search of the room, you guys get out. And we did have a partial collapse of the house where we were. But by making that push, they got the search of the room done. And that's ultimately what we're there for, is people. So we have to get the searches done. I'm an engine guy through and through, but ultimately we're there so we can do a search for people. Every fire in history's gone out. Whether we put it out or not, it's gone out. So we're there for people to get searches of rooms done, searches of buildings done. And the engine has to progressively move forward so that we can do that. So I take pride in the fact that that is our company culture that was passed down to me from senior guys of this is what you can and can't do. These are the beatings you can and can't take so that you can push through and they can get these searches done. But that's something you got to pass down. You can't tell somebody, hey, this is the amount of heat you can take, or this is what burning feels like, and this is what isn't. This is decision time. Oh, this is just heat passing through your gear. That's time in actually making fires with people and training. That was a big training moment with my first captain, as he would light the drill tower on fire and sit there, and he would sit closer to the fire than you and ask you to tell him about fire behavior. And you never notice that he's like, you're young, you don't even notice. He's not looking at the fire, he's looking at you, and he's watching to see you move. And if you start flinching, and he would always tell you if you backed up, you were gone. But if you start doing this and you're moving because you're getting warm, he's explaining to you how your gear's working. That as you fluff your gear and you create those air pockets, that's how your gear works. Then you would start to get that feeling, and what's wrong? And you'd be like, hey, Cam, I think I'm burning. No, you're not. This is exactly what's happening. Your gear's absorbed all the the heat it can take. It's starting to allow it to pass through. Then you'd continuously go through, and he'd say, okay, now you're at the point. This is decision time. This is where you're burning. That's how you get good on the fire ground, is you understand your equipment, not just I can flow and move this hose. I understand how my gear works. I understand what the feeling I'm feeling translates to of actually burning or not burning. So I can make these decisions, and then we can be aggressive to the point we're pushing forward and we can get those searches done.
No, those are great points. And something you just said, and we've talked about this in the past, is when you open the line. I remember in your class you just said recently, I was listening, and you said ultimately who has the nozzle or something, who has the say of the nozzle, and you think the nozzleman does, but ultimately the officer does, right? Yeah. And I thought that was funny, and there was so much truth to that, where you say open the line, and if the nozzleman decides to open the line, he better be burning, like really burning, if he decides to open it without your command, right? Is that kind of how you roll?
So our thing is we let them make it their own decisions. We have a lot of companies riding with 3. If they need slack, the boss might have to go get it. The last thing we want them to do is sit there and get hurt because they're afraid to make a decision to open the line. If they open the line and they didn't need to, the worst thing that happens, we tell them, hey, bro, shut the line down. We'll tell you when to reopen it. And they get made fun of a little bit at the firehouse. But the worst thing that could have happened was they didn't open a nozzle, and now they're a statistic. So we give them the option, hey, if you feel you need to, open it. If you couldn't see, it was dense black smoke to where you had no visibility and you were that hot, you felt the need to open it, you didn't cause any more damage than's already in these houses. We see hurricanes, we see floods all the time. You can dry a house out. It's not worth you thinking you're going to cause some water damage, they're going to dry out, isn't worth someone getting hurt. It's a learning moment, cool. But ultimately, the officer's in charge. If the nozzle man's not opening the nozzle and the officer wants it open, say, open the nozzle, bro. They're going to open it. If they open the nozzle, the officer doesn't want it open, hey, bro, shut the nozzle down. We'll open it up when I tell you. So ultimately, the officer's in control. It's an illusion. You let the nozzle man think he is, but if they're doing great, you don't have to say a word. You can cheerlead for them. Hey, you're doing great. If they're making a mistake, it's a learning moment. That's how you progress and learn. We've all made those mistakes, and that's just a learning moment. But for us, we don't always end up in a position where that officer can be right on their shoulder. On my company, a lot of times we are, because we do ride 4 people almost 99% of the time. A lot of our companies ride 3. If you get hung up and you were the first company in there, the other company's doing a search and there's no one backing you up yet, you might have to go back and get slack for them so they can move up and make the next turn. If I'm making that position, I'm going to tell them, hey, bro, if you need to open a nozzle, do it. Don't sit up here and just wait for me and I'm not there. So for us, we do deal with that where they might be alone. I don't have any issue with my guy opening the nozzle because he feels he needs to. Now, if it was the wrong moment to open it, we can take that as a learning lesson and discuss it so they understand why they shouldn't have, or if they didn't open it and I had to tell them to open it. That's another discussion when we get back to where we can say, hey, this is why you should have opened it. This is what I saw or felt or experienced before of why I wanted that nozzle open, so that they can learn from your past experiences as well. We use helmet cams so we can go back and watch the fire, and then we can learn that from as a training moment as well. We'll watch the fire. You're seeing it in live time of, hey, this is what was going on when I told you to open the nozzle. or that you didn't need to. So, but we don't tell them strictly they can't. They have 100% free will to do, and we can learn from it. But ultimately, the officer's always in charge of the nozzle, because if they say to open it or close it, that's what the nozzle man's going to do.
All right, I guess I misunderstood what you were saying in that class, but that clarifies it very well. I think that we've done this to ourselves, though, in the sense of the fire service. I think there's confusion of when to open that line, because at one time we're telling you don't open line. You can't open the line on smoke, right? And we've trained firefighters not to open the line on any bit of smoke. Wait until you see the fire, open the line, put the fire out. Going to more fires and learning more. Now we have what we've always had, but we have black smoke, right? So this changes the game a little bit of what we've always taught or understood for probably a few different generations. Why don't you talk about that a little bit, how that has changed the game and why we're losing nozzle firefighters? It's crazy to me that we are losing nozzle firefighters, and it's more and more nationwide. And I think it comes because of a confusion or a disconnect from what was once taught in a textbook to real life scenarios.
Yeah, so I always tell people it's an old article he wrote. Read the article "Death on the Nozzle" by Kevin Story, and you'll actually see how long this trend's been going on of guys dying on the nozzle. But I think it's we taught something in a textbook and we drove it home. No water on smoke, no water on smoke, no water on smoke. Get in the room with the fire, put it out. And that's how I was taught when I came up. And that's what you did. You took beatings you didn't have to. But like we had a fire where some guys got hurt, and we were there. So I had some senior guys call me and they were like, "Man, what happened? How did it get to that point that these guys got hurt?" And you're telling them a story, and the guy in the nozzle flat out told me, "Man, I didn't want to steam anybody," and things like that. And we started talking, and they were like, one of the guys calling, he had over 30 years on, one of my biggest mentors, and he was like, "Yeah, that's what we were taught too, but we knew when to just open it. If you got so hot you couldn't see, you just opened it." But that's lost in translation, especially when the book work becomes the bulk of the majority of your time and training and not the hands-on. So we get all these standards. They have to have so many time with the hours with the books and this many hours with the hands-on. That's not the way the old guys were taught. And they were able to get that translation passed down by doing it hands-on. Now it gets said in the book so much, and that's what's in your head. And the last thing you want to do is be the guy that opened the nozzle when you weren't supposed to, and now you're getting made fun of. So I think it gets lost in translation of it's constantly preached in a classroom and not given that context of, but there are scenarios when you do need to open a nozzle on smoke, and this is why. And then you give those scenarios. Like I said, the senior guys were saying, "Man, but we were in houses back 30 years ago, and that's what we were told. You don't put water on smoke. But when we got that hot, we opened the nozzle. Why isn't that happening now?" Well, somewhere there's a disconnect. Somewhere that got lost in translation. So you just got to tell your people, like, again, especially a house, if it's sheetrock, if you can't see that sheetrock's getting replaced, what are you going to cause damage to by opening the nozzle? It's a learning moment. But in certain conditions, dense black smoke, you can't see, zero visibility. You're extremely hot. It's coming on you from every direction very fast. You start seeing detached fingers of flames in your overhead lighting off, and you can't see the seat of the fire. They're not connected. It's not just fire growth. You know what's coming, and you have the solution in your hands. But if you don't make that decision to open a nozzle, what's the outcome? Now you're a statistic. But we've got to give people the ability to make that decision, but also the training and the understanding of when that decision comes into play. It's not just you go through the door and you can't see, so you open the nozzle. It's under certain circumstances, but you have to have that conversation. You have to do that training. You can't just tell people, "Hey, you only open the nozzle on fire, not smoke." That always and never game comes into play, and now you're setting them up to fail. And the failure is a very, very real thing because of what it's going to come to. It's not just burn something down. They're going to be the failure. They're going to be the statistic.
That I think a lot of that disconnect comes from instructors without real life practical experience. And I'm not, sometimes, we have to do fire one. I understand that. We have to get firefighters through firefighter one, and not everyone is crawling down hallways every day. That's the truth of the matter. But we have to be careful when we're in the role of passing on the information, especially in academies that have the propane burn buildings where they're not burning any bit of fire. There's no realistic learning experience whatsoever. So we have to have those conversations. We have to understand that we can open the line, not necessarily on the seat of the fire, That said, though, there's a conversation that also has to be had is that when we're opening that line, not necessarily on the seat of the fire, but rather on fire, that is not water on the fire. So we have to be very careful on who gets that transmission. Now, someone could see the line open, operating on fire, and say we have water on the fire. However, that's the engine officer's command. That's the only person to give that command. Nobody else should be giving that command because now water on fire, someone sees that water on the fire, two different transmissions completely. Well, now the truck hears that, they start taking windows, and now we go from one room fire to fire front to rear, and we're not prepared for that drastic change. Cutting people off, firefighters searching ahead and above and opposite that line, truly affected because the tempo of that fire will change very rapidly once we change that quote unquote flow state or that tactical decision to take a window. We have to have water on the fire, separate than water on fire. And that's a transmission that maybe you should probably never give, right, Anthony? As far as I have water on fire, like you're not going to ever give that transmission.
No.
So that's a transmission that you have to leave for the engine officer. When he feels he has water on the fire, water is on the fire, he gives the transmission.
Yeah, and that's what we do. None of my guys put that on the radio. That's my job to put that out there. Let the chief know, let the truck know ahead of us or above us. Hey, we got water on the fire because I'm telling you, we're there. I'm giving you that sense of relief. Hey, we got it. Do what you got to do. We're there. So that only comes from me. They don't give that transmission on the radio.
And with that, I feel that if they're trying to get in touch with you and you're not answering, you're working.
Right.
Let the men work, get water on the fire, and things will change. Now, if there's nothing happening from the outside and you're seeing no progress, right? So that's a different conversation, right?
Yep.
You can't be fishing for water on the fire. That's nothing you go fishing for. You have to wait for it. I just don't like when I hear people ask, do we have water on the fire? Now, that said, I did have a fire as a firefighter in a truck company searching past the seat of the fire. And I was isolated in a room. It was fine. It was one room. It wasn't much, but I didn't want to take any windows until we had water on the fire. So I went on the radio. For example, ladder 1, the engine 1. Get a hold of the officer. He answers me. Hey, Lou, do you have water on the fire? Hold on. We're getting there. 2 seconds, we have it. Boom, boom, boom. Water on the fire. We hear the transmission. I take the window. So not that I was fishing for it, but I wanted to know my next decision because it felt like that internal clock was taking a little bit too long. And that came from a stretch. Like different stretches take different times and different tempos of fires. But I think it's okay to ask tactically on the fire floor or floors above. But it's when you get the command staff level asking, that puts pressure on officers to give a transmission that they're not fully ready to give. But if you're having a conversation on the fire floor, that's a little different. I think that where we're not prompting it, we're asking. Two different.
Yeah, I agree. And like to put some context too to what we've been talking about, like for us, we give guys the decision, make the decision. If you need to open a nozzle, do it. And I've talked about it in my class. Rico, he came through that day. But when we were the RIT team at a fire, and we're in there searching to make sure we've got everybody out, and we got in a real tight bind. I mean, it was a compromised position to where you're thinking, and we had left him at the door with the nozzle, and we're going, come on, Rico, we need you to come through for us. Like we're about to get jammed up in here because we were making sure we had everybody accounted for. And when he saw that smoke condition change and things got pretty nasty inside really, really quick, he didn't wait for me, who was inside doing the search, to make sure we had all our guys accounted for, to say, Rico, open the nozzle. He told me, I was telling him, but he told me I never heard it. When he saw the conditions change in the smoke and knew what was coming, he opened that line above our heads. He changed the day. If he had hesitated, you don't know what the outcome is. But he didn't hesitate. He was given that, we trust you, make the decision. We put you in this position for a reason on what we're doing. We trust you with that nozzle to keep us while we do this. We got there, things went a little south. We had everybody accounted for, but we're still in the building now. And it changed very, very, very rapidly. Like you talk about it's a wood frame building. It was a small wood frame building. It's light switch was the changes. It changed like a light switch and he reacted. He didn't hesitate. He made a decision. It was the right one, but it was the change it's what changed the game for us that day. So there is a benefit to giving them that free will, that trusting them to make the decision. And then if they make the wrong one, you talk about it. The worst thing they did is some more water damage. So
Yeah.
I'd rather them be willing to make that decision. And that's just one example of where somebody was given that permission, that ability to make their own decision. They didn't hesitate. They made a decision because they needed to, and they made the right one, and it changed the game.
Talking a little bit more about, I guess, the cultural side of things, but like engine vocabulary. So there's a difference between backing the line out and moving the line, right? And a term that gets, I feel, maybe not passed on, but lighten up the line. Do you use that term in Mobile, lighten up the line?
We just say slack instead of lighten up the
Slack.
line. We say give slack.
So lighten up the line. If you hear that, a lot of people look at you like you're crazy. I feel like that's some vocabulary that has not been passed on, which I do not understand. But for the most part, the Northeast, if you say lighten up the line, that just means feed more line. And backing the line out, much different command or order than moving the line. When I say back a line out, that means we're backing the line out of the fire department, and it's the last thing we do. Everyone's off the fire floor. Everyone's off the floor above. That nozzle man is the last guy. Our last defense is that nozzle. And we're backing the line out many times with that line operating as we're backing out sometimes. So moving the line and the fire department, two different things. And I think that gets confused when you say move the line. People think we're moving the line out of the room or out of the apartment, rather, when we're just trying to move a line out of a room and to reposition to a different room. Is that the same terminology that you're using?
Yeah. So same thing. If we say we're backing a line out, it's coming out of the building. The rest is kind of the same thing. It's like, hey, we're just moving it over here. Hey, we're going to back up, but not, the back out. That's the big thing for us. If we say we're backing out, it's going all the way out of the building.
Yeah. I mean, that's something, it's a little different everywhere you go. And I think it's something that should be drilled on. And that's a great kitchen table drill. Like, you don't have to be stretching lines every day. We can sit down and just talk about what our vocabulary is and how everyone's on the same page.
Well, and we had that conversation too. We had a young guy working with us one day, and that was the first thing they said after the fire was, "Did you notice?" And it was just our senior guys talking. Did you notice we didn't have to say much? Everybody knew their role from training and previous calls, previous fires. Everybody knew where they fit already. We used riding assignments. They knew exact tool assignments. They knew their exact position of where they fit in for us to do our assignment. There wasn't a, hey, you do this, you get this, you do this. It was everyone just went into operation, knew where they fit in. So I think a lot of that, like you said, it comes in a tabletop drill. You could take out a lot of the stuff that has to happen, a lot of the talking that has to happen, just by having it set through training, through riding assignments, all these kinds of things. To people already, they don't have to ask a question. They know where they fit. They know what their role is at that fire. What is your role to make your company successful to achieving their assignment? That's your ultimate job at a fire. You're part of a company. Company gets an assignment. Company needs to be successful. Where do you fit, and how do you make your company successful? If you don't have to do a lot of talking to ask and find out what your role is, you're already set up for success. That doesn't take a lot of a big drill to do that. That's a conversation. That's a simple, hey, this is the riding assignment. This is where you fit today. Do what you're assigned to do. If you don't, I know who didn't do their assignment. It's very simple. So it goes a long way to do little things, riding assignments, those tabletops, so everybody knows where they fit. And then you don't have to do it on the fire ground when emotions are up, stress is up, chaos is going on. It's already handled. They just know where to fit in and plug and play.
Yeah. And that's company integrity. That's all it is. And I think that engine company integrity is a little different than truck company integrity. Truck company, we're individuals, we're operating more solo, more of a dance. I've said that before. It's more of a dance, if you will, where the engine company integrity, it's progressively moving forward. It's a cadence, it's a march. It's true teamwork. And when you fail or make a mistake in an engine, everyone knows. The dominoes begin to fall the wrong way very, very quickly when we're not moving the line forward. When that stretch gets snagged, we lose water, burst length, frozen hydrant, right? That's all part of it. The stretch starts with the chauffeur and it goes all the way to the nozzleman. And there's so much room for mistakes, but we can't make them. Because when you make a mistake in an engine, firemen die. That's the bottom line. Civilians, of course, they're going to die. We don't get water on the fire, but we're putting our X's and O's, we're putting our members into position, expecting that line to be there. And when the line doesn't get there, well, things are starting to go bad. And the tempo of that fire tends to begin to change very rapidly. So just understand when you're talking about company integrity, engine company integrity, there is zero room for mistakes. And this comes with being on the same page, as simple as your vocabulary. And that's a drill, again, we can just do at the kitchen table. Um, as far as mistakes in the engine, if you feel that you're part of that team and you're starting to fill in the gap, understanding where you fit in, like you just said, and something's not right, you have to be able to have the humility to tell your officer something's not right. Because during the firefight, we can't find out in the moment that something is wrong. We have to know leading up to that. And we'll, at that point, we'll be able to call an audible and fill in that gap, that position of where you're supposed to be. That's okay. We can fill that gap in the moment, but we have to know before we engage in the firefight. Very, very important to have a little bit of humility when things are starting to go wrong. We don't want to miss the fire. I understand that. Nobody wants to miss the fire. But we have to be honest with ourselves sometimes that something went wrong.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I mean, don't create something wrong. We all want to be the on the nozzle that puts the fire out, but that's not always your role. You're the assigned the backup line. You're assigned the backup line. If you're racing up there trying to beat them, that's what's led us into problems on fires I've been at before, where we were having maydays. Was, hey, we all want to get some. We ended up having to realize, like, hey, we got to know where we fit. And that's where Rico really changed the game that day for us with that Mayday, as we're accounting for people. 3-year guy, he wasn't inching in trying to get a little bit more. He knew his assignment. His role was stay at this door. We're going down this hallway. It's a shotgun house. Everything's in line. Be where you could put a nozzle over our head if it goes south. But don't come be a part of the problem by being in here with us and things go south. Be right here. He stayed right there. He understood his role. I asked him where it came from. He went to a conference in Texas, heard Mo Davis and Clyde Gordon say, "Hey man, we just retermed it so it was a mental thing. We didn't call it a backup line. We called it interior RIT." And he said that's what changed the game for him, is he thought of his role, where he fit on that fire, a little bit differently, because he wasn't so much thinking about, I've got this line, I can go put a fire out. Is my job is I'm an interior RIT team.
And that was, I mean, obviously we love Mo and Clyde,
Yep.
great guys, and tremendously valuable from looking at things a little bit more simplistic and a little bit more educated, and they roll it into one, and they deliver it in a way that really changes the game on the fireground, and that's a great example of it. I think that learned behavior is the engine company, right? And more so, we're learned in the sense of this is how we stretch. We count floors, we estimate the stretch, call for water, bleed the line. These are all learned behaviors we're learning in the fire academy, where the truck's more of an instinctual notion where we're making decisions under instinct. But changing the vocabulary just a little bit, or changing the mindset of what that job is as far as the backup line, can change the game. Like, I think that we gotten away from the backup line altogether. One room fire, a lot of times that line doesn't even get stretched, and if it does, it's left dry. I think we have to get back to the fundamentals of firefighting, that we are stretching that backup line, or that RIT line, like you said, charging it, head on the swivel, and ready to perform. I think that's very important, especially with the way things are changing with lithium ion. And I've talked about that in the past with that backup line, but we have to get those backup lines stretched and get the backup line stretched into position. But let's get another line started to the floor above very quickly. Again, this comes into staffing and filling in the gaps, the X's and O's. I understand all that as well. That changes things, but I think that moving forward, the way fires are necessarily changing to a continuous type fire with the introduction of lithium ion batteries, we have to have that third line rapidly deployed and ready to go to work on the floor above, because now putting members on the floor above and doing a search, we're getting into a different ballgame. And I had it on a different episode. I talked about thermally loaded exposures on the floor above, and it's something that's real. Like, these devices, these lithium ion devices, or these batteries, at 140 degrees, they're vulnerable for runaway. So on the floor above of any good fire, you're going to hit those temperatures very rapidly. So having that third line stretched, ready, and charged, head on a swivel on the floor above, as well as that backup line committed to the fire floor, Very, very important decision-making task as far as the engine company, and that falls under the line of culture, I believe. I believe that still the culture of firefighting is the engine company and getting those lines into position, but we've gotten away from being disciplined and being committed because we all want a little piece of the fire. There's not enough fires going around, so we're moving lines on the fire ground to maybe positions or places we shouldn't necessarily be moving them.
Yeah, I agree. And it all comes down to just, you say it all the time, knowing where you fit in. Can't always be the one on the nozzle putting it out. Where do you fit in? It's where you arrived. Hey, you got the backup line. That's your role here. Do that the right way and do the best that you can at it. Get it in position, protect that nozzle company.
Yeah, and I think that comes into what I talk about as the firefighter IQ, or understanding staffing and the X's and O's of where we put people in the fire building versus the fire ground. Now, far too often I see a dry line being stretched with too many firefighters on the roof. Totally remote, cutting a misplaced or mismanaged hole on a roof. I'm not saying we don't cut roofs, but let's talk about staffing. We're so quick to hear the arguments on staffing on the fire ground across the board, engine and truck. I think if we take some of those firefighters that are not understanding solely where to fit in and get that truck thing out of their head, especially in an understaffed department, get them off the roof and get them stretching that line into position. We have to have water on the fire. We have to get that first line into operation before a second line is even considered. So put all your manpower getting that line into place. Then we can kind of branch off from here and there, but that comes down to understanding X's and O's. Every fire's tempo is different. Every fire is different altogether as far as how we're going to fight it, but not necessarily how the tactics change. It's just looking at the details and how these fires are affecting our staffing. It's about positioning our players in the right spot in the fire building. It's all it is. The first line. How many guys are stretching your first line?
So, and it all depends. Different sides of the city. The further east you go towards us, very, very stacked on top of each other companies, getting there at the same time as each other. The further you go west, the more spread out suburban it is. They're there by themselves. Um, so you could have a 3-person company and there's someone that drove. They're probably going to be helping with the stretch, but there's 3 people involved. That includes the boss. You come down by us, you're going to we ride with 4. A lot of times I'm getting some recon done. The driver's helping them get the line pulled and then 2 people stretching it. But it's very easy. If we have to do, it's not just a house and we have to go around stairs or things like that. Just get on the radio. At least for us, we have people right on top of each other. Our second and third in engines are going to arrive literally right behind us. Just get on the radio and say, hey, don't stretch a backup line. Assist us with this. Now you got 2 engines stretching that line. We've got to make sure that first line gets in place. The backup line's no good if the first line doesn't make it. We've got to get that committed first.
So once they help you stretch that line into position, are they now backing up, going to the rig, and then starting a second line, or are they committed to backing you up on that line?
It would depend. Most times they would be committed to us because for us to need their help, we're inside. So at that point, they're going to stay with us. But if it was just a really long stretch, something like that, they could go back and get the second line. But most times, once they got on the line with us, they're going to stay with us. We're going to make sure that line, once it's charged and moving, is staffed correctly to be able to continuously push forward.
So, and you're stretching pre-connects?
So we have both. We do have a bulk bed and we have the pre-connect. A lot of the department is very pre-connect driven. It fits most of our run areas. For us, we use the bulk bed for everything: static bed, dead bed, whichever you call it. Just because our run area is so varied that we might only need 3 lengths on this one and 8 lengths on this one. So it's one skill. They're very, very good at stretching off that bed instead of, hey, for this we use this, for this we use this. They're very good at that. Estimate the stretch, get as many people involved as you need based on how much hose you're taking out of that bed and stretch off of it. So we use the bulk bed the most.
And what's your average length as far as the stretch when using a bulk bed?
So for us, the most common stretch for us is still 200 feet within our normal pre-connect, just because of the houses we typically make our fires in. At a very short setback, 1 and 2 story dwellings is still the bulk. But because of the fact we got a lot of warehouses, all that kind of stuff, it does play in. It's still one skill. It's just how many folds of hose you're taking with you. So they're very good at it versus They're very good at the pre-connect, and now they got to go to this other load, and they got to rely on, okay, I did this in training. No, it's the same every time. It was just the amount of folds you counted and pulled with you.
Yeah, and it just, where I'm going with this is that, we're so quick to look at staffing in a negative aspect. And listen, we all want more firefighters, but I think that staffing, for the most part, it parallels, your area or what your stretch is going to be. So if you're stretching 200 feet, right? 4 lengths, you said that's your average
4 lengths.
stretch.
Yep.
Yeah, 4 lengths. That's very doable with 3 guys,
Yep.
right? So now take a larger building, longer stretch. We're up to 16 to sometime 18 lengths of hose. So when you have 6 to 8 firefighters stretching that line, you're understaffed. So it's all relevant to the buildings and the area that you're working in. So as far as staffing, we all want more firefighters, but let's not use that for an excuse not to get the line into position. We have to be able to understand that it kind of goes into the run area that you're working in. I think that everyone is tremendously understaffed. I really do. I think that across the board, engine companies are understaffed. But let's be able to understand where we fit in as far as our run area and getting that line into place and not using staffing as an excuse. I don't know if it's the right thing or wrong thing to say, but staffing dictates the stretch. But let's not jeopardize the stretch by looking at staffing as a negative aspect. If that makes any bit of sense. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean the building is going to dictate the stretch. The fire is going to dictate what size line you pull. None of that's going to be dependent on the staffing. That's the fire and the fire building dictating that. If you make those decisions based on your staffing, you're setting yourself up to fail. If you pull up and you say, "Hey, I need a 2.5," but we don't have enough people, you're just going to lose slow. You still need a 2.5. That's the fire dictated that. If the building dictates you need 8 lengths, you still need 8 lengths to get to the fire. That doesn't change. What we can do is we can do what we're supposed to do, stretch to the line and the length of line that the building and the fire dictate, and then we just change our staffing. Tell the next engine, don't worry about a second line. Get on this one so we can staff this line correctly so that we can win.
And that comes down to your X's and O's, firefighter IQ, and repositioning it in the moment, having the ability to call an audible out of fire, regardless if it's cutting a hole, pulling a ceiling, forcing a door, throwing a ground ladder, or making that stretch. Sometimes if you're riding on the truck, maybe you got to help with the stretch. But that comes down to that audible on scene and making sure that we do get that water on the fire very quickly, and having every firefighter across the board to understand that at any moment they can be called to do any task in a fire. It really ultimately comes down to the command staff level to make that decision, but have that in your training to know that you can make a decision or be asked to make a decision that kind of goes off center of what you're expected or what you think you're going to be doing at a fire.
Yeah, and to me, that all comes down to training. You got to get outside of your comfort zone. If I'm in an engine and all I train on is engine, when we get to the fire and they say, "Hey, the second truck's delayed, get the floor above," what are we going to do? You're putting people in a position to fail. And so you got to get out of your comfort zone. Now, obviously, if you're in an engine, I'm in an engine. We're going to train on engine most of the time. We have to be great at that. But I have to set them up for success when we get a different assignment or they get detailed. They get detailed out. They work overtime. They're in an engine. They're going to work in an engine. The fire we had last night, we made it with one of our guys, your buddy, big-headed kid. He was detailed to a truck. They were the first due truck. They were in the house with the first due engine. We get there, we made a fire with him, but he was in the truck. We're the engine. We were in different roles. He's set up to fail if you don't prepare him for that too. He's got to be able to force a door. He's got to be able to throw a ladder. He's got to be able to do a search. So you got to get outside of that comfort zone sometimes too.
And that's a kid who, when you say big head, he's not an egotistical kid. He has
He's just
physically
got a
has
very
a large head.
large head.
With that, he's a great kid, and something I like about him is that here he is. He's in a career engine company doing a relatively large amount of fire duty. I see him at a conference doing all truck stuff, and he's really embracing the truck side of it because he just like you said, you never know when the audible is going to be called. And we have to be able to cross train and cross reference. There's a lot of companies that are single engine companies, and I think it's important that we cross reference or doing those multi-unit drills and paying attention to what the truck is doing, even as how to set that aerial up or reposition an aerial, because if you happen to be an engine company standing there, standing fast to go to work, and a firefighter shows at a window, and there's no one there to reposition that ladder for whatever reason, you have to know how to do it. It's so important that we know every aspect of this job. That's a lot of times why I feel understaffed departments are more well-rounded firefighters for the most part, because they have no choice not to be. They have to know every job, because when they get to a fire, they're going to be asked to fit in or fill the gaps, not necessarily an engine or truck concept, but just a firefighting concept.
Yeah, and I used two fires I made very different ends of my career. One, the I'm in my probie year working overtime. We're on the second alarm. The rescue was already made, and one a year and a half ago, where we made a rescue, and it was just two different ends of the spectrum. We have double house, dedicated engines and trucks. So we're an engine, they're the truck. Hey, somebody's trapped. We'll put the fire up. They're going to go search for them. So this first one, I mean, I was in my probie year, but they pull up, people showing, engine pulls up first. It happened to be the deputy chief, the operations chief of the department was there, and they started to grab a ladder. He said, "No, stretch the line. Let the truck get them. They're right behind you. Let them do their job. Go do yours." That's our culture. We've dedicated engines and trucks, especially on the east side of the city. So we would train on the truck work. We would train to where you're detailed, you're comfortable doing it, you're working overtime, you can do it, you can do the searches, force the door. But we wouldn't train with other companies on, hey, we just got here and I got someone showing, I'm going to hand this line off to you, we're going to do a search. Like, no, ladder truck's going to get the search. That was our culture. But what we did train with, and it translated, was, hey, if you have a mayday and you have to pass your nozzle off to us so we can go get the fire because you're trying to get your guy out a window or something like that. And it translated to when we pulled up, we forced the door, we're first due, and we can hear somebody screaming inside, and we turn and the truck's not there. Now there's no truck to do the search. Now we had to make a decision. We made the decision to end up giving our lineup to the second due engine because we had the most staffing on scene. We could cover the most ground on a search very fast. And if he stopped screaming, we already had an idea of where he was going. That was a big audible to be called. If we never trained on the truck work, the search, how would that have gone? You know, even if we hadn't done that Mayday training of being able to pass a nozzle off to another company and it just goes like that, these things come into play. What it did make me realize is, yes, our culture is dedicated engines and trucks. It doesn't mean we won't ever end up in that position. We weren't necessarily the best prepared for it, but we were prepared for it through other things. But the biggest part was, if we never trained on search, we never trained on how to grab somebody. We went with just stuff. Hey, this is how I would do it if I was in that position talking about it in a classroom. The reality of somebody with special needs with a lot of CO that's fighting you, literally undressing people, fighting them all the way out the door. The reality of trying to do some drag or this and that wasn't going to come in. You know, it was the reality of actually doing stuff that made it successful.
You know, I think a great engine drill, as far as going both ways with it, is that engine chauffeur taking the portable ground ladder off the engine and throwing it up to a porch, throwing it up to a window. You know, just learning how to get it off the rig proficiently is a drill in its own, because we're so set on engine company culture, engine company work, so quick to dismiss the engine a lot of times because we're a truck based city, where I am at least. But how important is it for them to be cross trained, where that engine chauffeur needs to be proficient in throwing a portable ground ladder, to getting it off the rig proficiently, getting it to a window, understanding where to fit in, and keeping his eyes and ears on the fire building. Right, size up is a continuous thing. We talk about size up and how, you know, it starts with the sound of the alarm or the ticket or the drive into work or whatever it is for you. But size up is always changing, recalculating, rebooting, and moving forward. As an engine chauffeur, if you're in front of the fire building, your size up should be more distinct than anyone's, because you should have eyes and ears on that fire building. Once that line's deployed, once you're operating, you kind of, and now the stress level comes down as an engine chauffeur. This is a good time to maybe take that ground ladder off there and throw it up if you have a moment. Maybe you think someone might show there, listening to the tempo of the fire, hearing where the brothers and sisters are operating. You know, I talk about throwing ground ladders with purpose and understanding where you fit into a fire, and that tempo is important, but we have to know where the brothers and sisters are going to be within that fire building. That comes from studying firefighter IQ. Getting that ladder up to where you know, okay, they're in this room, they're going to be in that room, and they're going to be in this room right here in probably about 35 seconds to a minute. Let me get that portable ladder up there, maybe. Forward thinking, especially with understaffed departments.
Well, I think the forward thinking comes into the same thing of figuring out where you're going to fit in when you're going to be the second engine or whatever engine it is for you stretches a backup line, and you're hearing that first engine get on scene and tell you what they have, and you know the size. You know you make fires in the same people all the time, so you're going to their area. You know the size of their buildings, and they tell you, hey, it's a 2-story, and that what they tell you it sounds like a single room fire on the second floor, a bedroom fire. Where do you fit in? When you get there, they're probably going to be making the top of the stairs and they're going to have it pretty good. You're going to be stretching a backup line, and then you're going to be helping search, or however you guys operate. But then it's able to tell you real quick when they haven't made the top of the stairs yet. They've run into a problem. What is it? Hoarding, lots of turns, things like this, where maybe you put that backup line down and you start getting them lightening up the line in your terms, slack for us, and you're getting and making sure that first line gets there because something's off. You know where they should be, and they're not. Something's out of normal for this. Let's make sure that they get that line there. We can't lose sight of that first line has to be successful. We can't be worried about this second line that's at the door. I'm stretching it, but this first line isn't in position yet. Yeah, maybe you stretch it, and maybe your OG say you have to. You can't help the first line. Okay, well, once you get in position, you can still help them lighten up the line. You can be doing things to ensure the success of that first line, and we can't lose sight of that. So knowing where you fit, like you saying that being in the front and knowing where you fit in and you're going to throw a ladder and knowing where they're going to be progressively going. It's the same thing with the backup line. You should know where they're going to be. Now you can identify if they're running into problems as well.
And it goes both ways, like I said, talking about the engine chauffeur throwing that ground ladder, right? Well, now let's talk about the truck side of things. If you're going the second due truck, a lot of times just the way the timing works out. The first due truck goes there. They start a line. Now they're stretching that line. The second due truck shows up. They're going to the floor above, but that dry line is still being stretched up the stairs. I'm talking about a multiple dwelling. Pick up the line and help the brothers. I mean, there's no union contract saying that because you have a run front piece on your helmet, you can't touch the hose. And I'm pretty certain that any engine guy would be happy to see you as a truck guy help up and just get that coupling around the railing and get it up into position. Another thing I see that bothers the shit out of me is when you see a fast truck or a RIT team standing there and they see guys struggling with the stretch. Now I'm saying it's not the first line in the position. Maybe it's that third line. Maybe it's even the backup line, depending on the timing of the fire, but you're not glued to where you're standing. We talk about softening up the building as a fast truck, which I do not like that term whatsoever. But I do think we have to be able to work as the fast truck or RIT team when we're standing fast. And that's as simple as picking up a coupling when it's around a parked car tire and moving it. I've seen it so many times where that fast truck or the RIT team stands there and watch them struggle with the stretch. That's where we need the guys' help. Yes, when you call for a mayday, they're going to go into operations. They're going to go in position and they're going to work. But let's set up for success by getting that line into position, and that's come from all hands. Anybody standing around, seeing a line struggle, just step in. Anywhere from the chief's aide to the fast truck to the second due truck, just step in and get that line into position. All right, so I guess we'll end with that. I think we touched on a lot of good topics as far as culture and pride, understanding where you fit in, a little bit of engine truck, the learned behavior versus the instinct, and how important it is to have that company integrity in everything we do. Staffing levels, I think we're understaffed in every job we go to. It's just that staffing ultimately is dictated by the terrain we're fighting fires in. I think we have to understand that. It certainly takes one person to put a fire out, and that's that nozzleman. But everything else is, everything as far as the fire ground is played away from the fire. That's where all the things are happening. That's where all the good stuff's happening. We focus on the fire so often, but we have to understand that we're playing off the fire. If you play basketball, we play off the ball. You watch the background of a basketball game, we're playing off the ball, right? You watch football, you have your eye on the QB, but that forward line, that offensive line, that's where the good stuff's happening. That's where the sport of football is being played. So we have to understand that everything's happening off the fire, and that staffing dictates the game you're playing in different arenas. So some couple of events we have coming up. Next month will be an FDIC. We're actually going the same time, right?
Yeah, I'll be doing the hands-on Monday and Tuesday, and then we lecture at the same time on Wednesday.
Yeah, so I'll be Wednesday the 17th at 1:30, and you're doing the same time. I'm doing my fire academy to the fire floor. What are you doing? Beds and
Yeah, I'm
bundles?
beds to bundles, the engine class.
Yeah. Okay, so we're doing that at the same time. So if you are an FDIC, pop in, see me, pop in, see him, and meet us for a beer after. March next year. So we have the dates for the firefighter. Was it?
South Alabama Firefighter Hot Weekend.
I could never get that straight. So, but that's the one in Fairhope, Alabama. That we all talk about it quite often. We have some really great instructors there. But that is March 8th and 9th of next year, and that fills up very quickly. And we keep that very tight. We don't go too big on the students because it really is we want the good ratio of instructor to student ratio, and I think we fulfill that pretty good there. That's a really fun conference, and it's very affordable. So if you can't make it to FDIC, that's a great second option because it's the same instructors you're going to get at FDIC, but you're going to get it on a smaller scale and more of an intimate setting.
Yeah, and then May 18th, both of us will be doing a one-day class in Calumet City, just outside of Chicago. I'll be doing the engine class. Mickey, you're doing the Fire Academy Fire Floor. So we call it the Engine Truck Seminar. It's half a day in the engine, half a day of truck ops. All lecture there. And then June 1st and 2nd, we'll be in Sussex County, New Jersey, where both of us grew up. I'll be doing the engine class. Mickey will be doing his class. And then on the second day, Todd Edwards was going to come, but he's going to be stuck out of the country. So I'll be doing one of his classes. It's called Breaking Barriers. It's intellectual disabilities training for firemen, and it's about mainly autism and Down syndrome, how to recognize it, understand it, better serve those people in our communities that have those things. And it's from personal experiences of ours. Both of us have children with those. And then a lot of interviews of people, caregivers, people with autism, people with Down syndrome, to just make a class that's very informative on a topic that we probably don't, for the most part, know very much about, and how to serve those people the best. And then also Mo Davis from Houston Fire Department will be doing his class there as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the second day. That Breaking Barriers class, I got to see Todd do it. It's probably one of the best classes that's out there. So if you ever see a dude coming through your area, it's not a class that everybody wants to jump on, right? We're not talking about tactics. We're not talking about engine company, truck company search. We're talking about something that is an uncomfortable topic to talk about. And Todd and Anthony bring it to you in a real straightforward and honest way. And there's so much value in it. And I truly think it's probably one of the better classes that's offered anywhere in the nation, in any circuit, to any conference. So if you see that, please step in and take at least a few minutes and a few notes on that. So that's it. All right, Anthony, well, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Yep, appreciate it. I'll see you up there in Indy.
Okay, have a good one, bro.
All right, you too.
Bye.